Tēnā tātou huri tēnei no Taranaki no Ngāti Maniapoto hoki. It's an honour to stand with my brothers from Palestine here today and to have stood alongside you these past 4 months as the full depraved genocidal violence of the Israeli Zionist state has unfolded in its most violent form. Thank you for sharing and helping us to understand the context a lot more. And I'm sure as I heard people reacting to your kōrero, a lot of us have a very implicit understanding of some of the experiences that you've had without conflating our experiences. They are of course very different, but there are certain things that we recognise because our tipuna have experienced those things, and certain things we recognise because our people still fight for our own survival and our own rights here in Aotearoa. We've heard a description of the Nakba, the catastrophe we've been through, our own versions of Nakba here in Aotearoa. As many people in this room will know, our population halved between 1840 and the turn of the 20th century due to colonial imposition, due to colonial violence, due to disease, warfare, due to displacement, impoverishment, the devastation of our economic systems. And it's so important for us to share these stories and to learn what are those common threads, what are those common challenges. And then once we do that, we start to see the picture emerge more clearly, what it is that we're dealing with. If many people here went through mainstream school as I did, then we're given, you know, I'm from Taranaki and there's this big debate about, you know, was the land sold, was it not sold? You know, we can fixate on these little details, but when we understand colonialism as a global project that has specific aims, we come to realize it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered because the goal was always to eliminate us. The goal was always to dispossess us, and the goal was always to replace us with white settlers. And you know, as we watch the violence unfold in Gaza and in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, we see what took place here as well, which is not just the military, but the involvement of settlers. And we see in that settler colonial project that the role of the settlers is to garrison the colony and to protect the spoils of conquest. And so once we start piecing these things together and seeing this not as, you know, individual sets of events but as a structure, we stop asking questions like why are we so poor? Why is our health bad? Why are we so imprisoned? Why did we move to the city? Why did we lose our land? And we start, as Moana Jackson and many others have pointed out to us, once we do those comparisons across Indigenous experiences, we start to ask the better questions, which is why do settler colonize criminalize our people? Why do they take our land? Why do they dispossess us? Why do they force us into poverty? Why do they allow us to die? And so by doing that, we see as well, and it's been highlighted very clearly, how colonialism operates as a global project. So we're never just fighting the settler government, we're always fighting the whole of the colonial allied West. And we've seen that international law is a total joke. It's set up by Western imperialists. It can never serve our interests. We can only use it cynically to make small gains, but we cannot imagine that the system that's not designed to oppress us can liberate us. We can learn a lot from decolonial movements around the world, Indigenous peoples who have achieved political independence but not economic independence, and we see that they're still suffering under the foot of imperialism and remain slaves in their own lands. And we also, once we start looking at these systems as global, we can start looking at the rise of the far right and what many people have come to Waitangi this year, specifically in response to. You know, even on our way up, we heard our kuia, our kaumātua, slagging off David Seymour. We all see that. We're horrified by how they're coming for our treaty rights. But this is not disconnected from what is happening at the moment in Palestine. This rise of the far right, the funding of it, the strategies that they use is part of the rise of the far right globally. And there's a reason for that as well. And it's because their system that they're trying to hold on to is under extreme crisis. The Western capitalist colonial project is in crisis. So the reason for that is because their economic system requires growth. You always need to be able to oppress more people. You always need to be able to extract more wealth, exploit more resources, destroy more whenua in order for that capitalist wheel to keep turning. And it can't anymore because we've reached the limits. The earth has reached its limits. There are no more people who are not already oppressed. The income inequality is outrageous. And so their system is in crisis, and we have only two choices ahead of us. And that is to rise against that, to have a new economic model, and that must be an international project, or, as the far right are trying to do, crush every popular movement by creating a global police state. So that's why we're seeing the rise of militarism, the tech sector, the rise of the securitization of the world. Space technologies fit into that as well. And their goal is to have like a AI, fully automated drone and satellite kind of system to repress and police us all. That sounds extremely dystopian, but we see these security alliances that the US is trying to make across the world. And at the moment, here in Aotearoa, that includes something called AUKUS, which is a pact between Australia, the UK, and the US at the moment. But our current government are trying to drag New Zealand into that suicide pact. And that's what it is. If you live here in the Pacific, AUKUS is a suicide pact. Because what it's setting us up for is war with China staged here in the Pacific. We see the US making all of these bilateral security pacts across the world, things like, with different nations, but also things like the Quad. And, you know, although that's terrifying, they're not doing that because they feel strong. They're doing that because their system is in crisis and they are weak. They can see indigenous peoples, they can see third world revolutionary struggles that are succeeding at the moment. We're seeing the US economy in crisis, we're seeing de-dollarization around the world, the rise of third world collectives like BRICS that are really challenging the US. They now have a peer competitor with China's economy growing as it is. And so they are militarizing out of a position of weakness. And so we're seeing countries like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Palestine rising up against colonial oppression because they understand that this is a pivotal moment that will have consequences for everybody as we move forward.
And many people have said this. We can see that when it comes to colonial violence, Palestine is on the front lines of that struggle. But as Fred Moten has said, we cannot allow Palestine to stand in for us. We cannot hide behind them. If we want to support Palestine, then we must wage
our own liberatory struggle here in Aotearoa against colonialism. I think I'll leave it there.
and she's going to tell us how to do it.